Thank you everybody for joining us on this next scholarly snippets. This one's titled Prompt Crafting for Beginners, and I think it's going to be a really fun topic. It's something that I'm really interested in and super, passionate about, I guess is a good way to put it. Just to introduce myself, I guess is a good place to start here. So I'm Kyle, and I'm the Electronic and Technical Services Librarian at the California Health Sciences University. So thank you for joining us. I'm gonna stop this real quick so we can jump in. And hopefully everybody can hear me. If you can't, Karen, please let me know. But here we go. All right, so this is going to primarily focus on building prompts for ChatGPT, right? So these basic principles will absolutely work on other generative AI platforms like Claude, and Google's Gemini, right? So, and I would encourage you to try your prompts out on multiple generative AIs, especially if for some reason, the output just isn't lining up exactly with what you're looking for. Now, I'm going to go over some foundational techniques that will hopefully circumvent that need entirely, right? And just give you the ability to correct a prompt on the fly and get the desired output. But honestly, sometimes it is useful just to see how other generative AI kind of respond to your prompt too, right? Now, the two main things I really hope that everyone takes out of this, right? And the two things I really want to instill in everyone watching this is number one, just confidence. If you watch any of my other sessions, I always start with this because I think it is really, really paramount, right? Just to ditch any apprehension and the anxiety that you may have and just dive into it, right? So confidence, efficiency, that kind of stuff. And number two, just general recognition, right? Just general exposure to this. I really think that's half the battle. Just remembering, excuse me, that we have access to this like amazing tool, right? And then we can use it for everyday tasks. Um, that it can help us, get things done more efficiently. And I just think the more you're exposed to this, to the terminology, to the use cases, all that kind of stuff, just the more it'll jump to the forefront of your mind when you get stuck or if you need to brainstorm or, et cetera, right? Um, so just a quick overview of what I want to go over. So I know there's a lot of videos out there and a lot of trainings that they just kind of throw a lot of prompts at you. And maybe, they have a free database, all that kind of stuff. But what I really want to do is go over what makes a good prompt and how to make a good prompt, how to recognize what's wrong, to give you the power to actually go out there and create good prompts yourself, right? Without having to rely so much always on looking them up or finding a database, that kind of stuff. I think that foundational knowledge is super important. So at first, we'll go over quickly the elements of a good prompt, very, very lightly, just kind of at a glance, what's good. Then I want to go over a prompting framework that I use. There are several good prompting frameworks, and I say this every time, but if somebody says that they figured out exactly how to prompt every time perfectly, they're probably trying to sell you something because there is no perfect way, right? It kind of varies each time, but there are some good frameworks that will be generally good, right? Kind of you can plug stuff in, and I'll show that. Um, so just effective versus ineffective prompts, kind of just reinforcing those ideas, and uh, this is going to implement that framework a little bit more, just to kind of recognize. And then common mistakes. So there's three major common mistakes that I see a lot. And kind of how to avoid them. And then what is reverse prompting? So this might be a new term to some. Some might know what this is, but this is a really cool thing. And then of course some bonus just tips and tricks that I want to go over. So with all of that combined, I think that you're going to have a really solid base to leave here and just start crafting efficient and effective prompts, right? And again, just kind of recognizing those times and situations where you can actually use this, but then actually be able to build them. That's key, right? So elements of a good prompt, I think it's good to start with just basic clarity, right? So I mean, essentially just using language that's straightforward and unambiguous, right? Just using clear language is really going to help avoid any potential confusion. I know this may seem obvious, but it gets really easy to write things like, tell me about diabetes stuff, right? Hopefully nobody here would write stuff, but it happens. Um, especially if this first few times using something like this, you don't really know how to prompt it. Just, all right, it'll give you an answer. Totally. Every single time you put something in, it's going to give you an answer. Just whether it's relevant or quality information, that kind of stuff. That's what we're looking for here. So a clear answer or a clear prompt would be provide an overview of the current treatment protocols for type 2 diabetes. Okay, so it's much more clear. That's much more specific, right? So that's actually number two, that specificity. So you want to be specific. You want to detail about what you want to know. All right. So being clear is more just defining the terms, but being specific about what you want to know is very important too, right? So this is going to help focus its response on more relevant information to you. All right. And again, some of this may seem obvious, but we'll build on it. So we could say, what are the effects of climate change? Okay, so it's more clear. It's just not super specific, right? That's still a very broad topic. So a better one would be, what are the predicted impacts of climate change on coastal cities in the next 20 years? Okay, so now we're clear and we're specific. So we're building on it. So number three is context. And honestly, context might be king of most of this stuff. Context provides obviously just that background information. It can set the scene for the query. It just really includes all the necessary details that can actually influence the response. Okay, so without context, not every prompt will have context, but the more context, the more example, that kind of stuff that you can give it, the better output it's going to give you, right? It's going to be a better guide there. So we could say, how do I treat this infection? That's obviously super broad. There's literally no context to that. So just something better would be, what are the recommended treatments for a strep throat infection in adults with penicillin allergies? So that adds a lot of different contextual elements, as well as making it clear and more specific. Okay, and we're actually going to make these types better too. So this prompt is okay, but we can make it better. So coming into the prompting framework. So again, there are a lot of different frameworks. I'm using one that's been relatively consistent for a long time, and I like it because you can kind of plug and play. You don't have to use all the elements, and I'll show you that in just one second. But I think before you do any kind of prompting, the biggest thing is to think about what's your goal, right? So before you think about the specifics and the clarity, just what are you trying to get out of it, right? I mean, even format-wise, are you trying to get a bullet point list out of it? Are you trying to get a table? Are you trying to get just brainstorming? Are you trying to get the answer to your question? Like, what is the actual goal? That's the best place to start. And having your goal in mind, you can actually use something like this, okay? So this goes in descending order, pretty much of importance. So we're pretty much always going to have a task, right? I mean, you can say hello to it and it'll say hello back, cool. But I think generally we're always going to have some kind of task in mind, whether it's write me an email or help me brainstorm or that kind of stuff, okay? So it's pretty much required to have a task, I would say. Number two and three is context and example. So these are kind of like 2A, 2B type, they interchange a lot. You really want to have at least one of those. If you can provide both, if it, is applicable, that's even better, okay? But adding some kind of context to your request is going to help, again, drive the output to be more accurate to your question, right? But then actually providing an example can be super important too. So if you have an example of structure or email or content, any kind of thing, like anything like that, to help it, kind of mirror that example, but then piece together your actual request. Okay, so we have task, we have context, we have example. Persona is very, very important, I think, and it's very powerful too, right? So if you say, you tell it, you're a medical doctor and answer this question versus, you're a fifth grader, answer this question, you're going to get very different answers. Okay. So using persona to actually guide your output is very powerful. And then format and tone, they're more interchangeable, right? So format, sometimes you want, again, like a list, maybe a numbered list, maybe a CSV file, that kind of stuff. So format can be important, not always though. And then tone. Okay, so again, if you're writing an email, you want it to be persuasive or happy or mean, whatever you want it, right? Tone can play an important role. It's not something you're always going to probably need, but they're there. So using this framework, I'm going to write the same three prompts 3 different times, and we'll look at the output. So here I have, you are tenured biomedical professor at a college of osteopathic medicine. Your task is to explain the Krebs cycle to me in simple terms as if I am a first grader. All right, so we gave it a task right here. We gave it some context of who it is and or what we want out of it. And then we gave it kind of the persona information, right? So this was the output. I put it in there. And it's fantastic, right? Imagine your body's like a toy factory that needs energy to make toys. So it's a very relatable example to a first grader, okay? It still has that high level information, but it's breaking it down into really neat chunks, right? So let's contrast that to the exact same prompt, except instead of first grader, we put as if I'm a medical student. So same thing, right? It's still kind of in that education mode, knowing that a medical student won't know this exactly, but the level of information is much, much higher, right? It's much more quality, much more advanced information. Again, still in that education mode, but just at a much higher level, right? So then this third one, instead of medical student, we put as if I'm an experienced medical doctor, all right? So this one's really neat. So it says right off the bat, as an experienced medical doctor, you're already familiar with the Krebs cycle, etc. So let's delve into a nuanced discussion that highlights its clinical relevance and recent insights that might influence practice research. So right off the bat, it knew that as an experienced medical doctor, you should already know what the Krebs cycle is. So it's going to give you more relevant information that it deems more relevant to you, right? So future research perspectives or future insights, that kind of stuff. But just changing that one aspect, right? First grader, medical student, and experienced medical doctor completely changed the output. Okay. So that's why these frameworks can be really, really powerful in kind of just specifically detailing exactly what you want. All right. And adding in the right components and all that. So moving on, effective versus ineffective prompts. So this is kind of building on that prompt framework, right? So an ineffective prompt, obviously, what are diabetes complications? Okay, very general, probably not going to hit exactly what we want. So obviously it lacks specificity about the type of diabetes. There's just a lot that we could improve on, right? So that's where that framework comes in. And if you've ever used Pico, which hopefully you have, you can almost set this up like a Pico, right? And I know if there's any librarians on, you probably all just sat up at attention to hearing that. But if we start plugging in, so let's say, what are diabetes complications? We start plugging that in. We can have a task that identify complications. Our context, right? We'll build on that. So we want specific to type 2 diabetes in elderly patients. Okay, so we're getting all this good information as we go down this list. Okay, so we want complications that impact mobility or daily activities. We want primary care physician preparing for patient consultation as our persona. Our format can just be a detailed paragraph with clear subheadings. And then the tone I added in there just for this case, so professional and thorough. All right. So putting all that together, since we filled out our Pico-like prompt, we have identify the most common complications of type 2 diabetes in elderly patients that affects mobility or daily activities, presented in a detailed paragraph with subheadings for each complication. This information is for primary care physicians to prepare for patient consultations, so please maintain a professional and thorough tone. So really, after you fill this out with what you're looking for, it's just plugging in the information, right, to build your prompt. And we can actually write that one other way. So this one, I literally just went task, context, example, kind of in order, right? And basically the exact same output, right? So it's just that structure. Once you learn the structure and the elements to include, you can start writing really, really nice prompts. So moving on here, some common mistakes. Again, just vagueness, all right? So this leads to just general or irrelevant responses, right? And I think we kind of already touched on this, but I really wanted to go back over it too. So how is diabetes treated? Okay, it's just too broad. It's going to give you an answer. Maybe that's what you're looking for, but probably not, right? So something better would be what are the latest treatment guidelines for managing type 1 diabetes in adolescents? All right, so that's good. Much more specific. It's just not as vague. Assumptions. So this is a big one too. I think a lot of the times we kind of assume the AI has context that hasn't been explicitly provided in the prompt, which will lead to responses that will completely miss sometimes, right? So I have an example here. Sorry. Okay. So what drugs interact with this treatment? Okay. So this is kind of a ridiculous example, but you're really assuming that the AI knows exactly what you're talking about, right? It only knows the words that you put into it. That's one easy way to say that. Okay. You can't assume that it's going to understand, right? It makes some great leaps sometimes, some great conclusions, but you just can't trust that. Okay. So this is a better way. What drugs interact with metformin in the treatment of type 2 diabetes. Okay. Um, Actually, one example that just came up recently. So I was kind of messing around with putting a rubric in and then papers just to see how it graded, right? So if it would grade close to what the actual grade was, that type of stuff. And when I was reviewing them, I noticed that in the student papers, I was seeing a lot of spelling errors, grammar errors, syntax errors, that kind of stuff that the feedback from ChatGPT said nothing about, right? So when I went back over the prompt and the rubric that I fed it, I hadn't said anything about grammar, language, syntax, all that spelling. Okay, so that's just something that I assumed in, um, grading. That's kind of a natural thing that you're looking for, right? So you just kind of assume that the AI was going to look for that, but I didn't tell it to, and it stuck exactly within the parameters of that prompt and gave me no feedback about that, right? So that's something that I'd probably go back and add in later, which actually brings me to my next one, no iterative refinement. So this is probably the biggest um, misstep when you're creating prompts. Um, you're probably not going to get what you want the very first time, right? So kind of expecting perfect answers from the first prompt without any adjustments, it's going to lead to frustration and inefficiencies, all that kind of stuff, right? You really want to just go back and keep refining exactly what you want. So, like in my example with the rubric, I would definitely go back the next time and add in that piece, right? So please, check for grammar, spelling, syntax errors, that kind of stuff. Um, but this is really, really important and probably one of the most important things. Don't get frustrated if your first prompt doesn't get anywhere near or if there's huge pieces missing. That's part of this, right? Is going back and refining it. I mean, sometimes a dozen times until you actually get the right output. Because there's probably going to be a piece that you're missing or that it's not understanding exactly. So just going back and trying to figure that out, right? But if you have the basis for all this, you can kind of understand where it's going wrong too, right? So is it missing a format? Maybe it's missing a little bit of context. Maybe I should give it a persona to actually kind of guide the response a little bit better, that type of stuff. So then that leads us to reverse prompt engineering. Okay, so kind of in a nutshell, what this is, and that's exactly what it sounds like too. You're taking a document, you're taking a summary, a sentence, a marketing catchphrase, something like that, and you're feeding it into ChatGPT and asking it, how would you create a prompt to get to this endpoint, right? So you're doing it exactly backwards. You're giving it the endpoint and you're asking, how would you start this? Okay. So one of the ways to do this, and I know I made up a ridiculous title. It's just fun to say the word prompt. Like when in your life have you ever said that word so much until recently? It's a fun word. So the prompt I would use here, or I did for this example. So you are an experienced prompt engineer. Okay. So again, we're giving it that persona. We're setting it up contextually. Your task is to look at the text provided, analyze it, and produce a concise prompt that would efficiently prompt generative AI to produce a similar output to the given text. Okay. Please ensure the prompt captures the tone, level of detail, and writing style of the given text. So this last part is very important, right? And there's a lot of things I could have added to that. You know, capture the context, capture, I don't know, the format. Like there's a lot of different things that you can adjust for this, okay? And then the text I input was um, a little summary on epilepsy that I actually grabbed from Medline Plus, okay? So the output that it gave me was this prompt. So describe a neurological disorder, detailing the typical symptoms experienced by individuals, the potential causes, the diagnostic methods used by medical professionals, et cetera, right? So the cool thing here is ensure the content is accessible to a lay audience, providing clear explanations without requiring specialized knowledge. So I love that it recognized this. I didn't tell it that I got this from Medline Plus, right? It just recognized that from the language being used, and it put that part in, right? Because that's exactly what we probably want. Now, full disclosure, when I put this in the ChatGPT, it produced a pretty long summary. So one thing I would probably do if I wanted it to be short like this, you could say short summary, a few sentences, concise, that type of thing. You can add those levels of details. But again, that's the iterative refinement. Okay, I had the base prompt here, and then there's definitely some additions that I could do to get exactly what I want. But again, this is a really cool thing to work backwards sometimes, right? So maybe there's just a really cool summary that you want to see how they would actually write that, or a rubric again, or a curriculum, something like that. So bonus tips and tricks with my last like 8 minutes here. Ask for clarifying questions. So this is something I almost never see, and it's very, very, very powerful. Okay, so the Zoom thing is kind of messing with what I can see here. Oh, anyway, so I have this prompt up here. I need information on immunotherapy. Can't read the rest of it. Anyway, you could probably read it. So ask me 10 clarifying questions to narrow down the search. Okay, so this is just an example. And then it gives me 10 questions that I can answer. So some of them are yes, no. Some of them are more specific, right? So I would probably just copy this and, fill in the answers and then paste it back in, and it'll give you more detailed information. So this is really, really cool, especially if the prompt is not working out, or if you're not 100% sure what you're looking for, or you want more detail in a section, right? Ask it to ask you clarifying questions. Okay, I chose 10. You can do 5, 10, 20. It doesn't really matter that part. Um, but ask it to ask you clarifying questions, right? So if you're building like a business plan, right? Have it do the structure and then ask questions of you in each section so that you can get a more detailed output, right? This is all building towards a more accurate response for you. Breaking down complex requests. So this, one of the biggest things too, you don't want to put in like a page worth of prompt, right? You don't want it to be really, really huge. The context and the examples, absolutely, right? You can put those in, but your actual questions, your tasks and stuff, you want to break it down. You want to be more concise, like I said. But if you're editing a large document, right? So say you just wrote a whole literature review and you wanted to edit it just to look for certain things, right? Don't paste the whole thing in and say, please edit this, give me the feedback. Break it into chunks. Write your prompt, put the introduction in, say, please look at this introduction section for all these types of things. Okay. When it gives you the feedback and the edits, okay, move on to the next section. Say, building on this, can you please look at the methods and materials section next, or the introduction, or however order you want to put it in. Just break those tasks down into chunks, right? So if you have complex requests, say, I'm doing X, Y, Z. Can you start with X? Tell me when you're done. Ask me for Y. Okay. So it'll keep building on itself, and then it's going to be less prone to just getting lazy, I think is the best way to call it, and just ignoring part of your request. All right. So don't get super complex. Um, just break it into chunks. And again, be open to refinement and iteration. I know this is probably the third time I've said this already, but I wanted to keep highlighting it because it is incredibly important to remember this. It's just, again, the first response from ChatGPT might not always meet all the requirements. Just be open to refinement, okay? Conditional prompts. So this if then. So using conditional prompts, it can help kind of explore various scenarios, right? It may not always be applicable, but it can be in certain times. So you're kind of exploring scenarios and their potential outcomes. So it can be a really cool tool for like decision support and planning different alternatives, right? So we could say if the primary resource available is an online interactive module on the human musculoskeletal system, then what complementary topics should I include in the curriculum to enhance student understanding of human body mechanics? Okay, we're setting up those if-then statements. And here's another one too. If a patient is allergic to penicillin, then what alternative antibiotics can be considered for bacterial infections? Now, obviously, you probably wouldn't ask ChatGPT this. Hopefully, you go to a better source, but it's just a good example of that if-then, right? That conditional prompting. So pretty much just in conclusion, I think ChatGPT is amazing for brainstorming or just getting unstuck, right? Um, and it can do so very quickly if you have that foundation in actually creating the prompts, right? That's just enormous. I threw in some just kind of hopefully idea sparking uh, things here that could help you think about when to actually use this, right? So email template generation, a lot of marketing, right? If you're not good at marketing, this can seriously help. Translation, all these types of things. This one, survey components. It is so good, we found, at creating survey questions. I mean, if you just give it a little bit of background about what your survey is about, it is amazing the survey questions that this comes up with. Just question generation in general, but honestly, just the brainstorming aspect. I'm going to go back to that. It is so good at brainstorming and helping you fight through if you're stuck in any place. So I would just definitely, have a conversation with it. So feedback on what's next. So please, in the chat, there's going to be a link to a survey. Please tell us how we did. And if there's any future areas, not just in this, in pretty much anything that you'd like to see someone talk about. And then please save the date. There should be a link in there for our next workshop on May 9th. And this is the title, using Dryad to promote open data sharing. Hopefully I said that correctly. But yeah, that should all be in the chat. And you can contact me anytime, krobinson@chsu.edu. But overall, just thank you for joining us. And if you have any questions, please let me know.